Tracy and Bird. On March 7, 1983, Tracy and Bird, a ninth grader at Bensalem High School in Bensalem Township, Pennsylvania, was dropped off at school by her mother's boyfriend, Paul Greenwald. Unknown to her family, Tracy had been suspended and could not return to classes until her mother met with the principal, a fact she had kept hidden. After being dropped off, Tracy attempted to convince her friends to skip school with her, but they refused. This marked the last time anyone heard from her. At first, police suspected that Tracy had run away, as she had previously left home for one night following an argument with her mother. Before her disappearance, Tracy confided in a friend that she might be pregnant. Authorities were unable to confirm if she was indeed pregnant or identify the potential father, although her friend mentioned she had been dating 2 boys. Despite numerous unconfirmed sightings, Tracy's family and close friends do not believe she ran away, as they are certain she would have reached out to someone if that were the case. She didn't even attend her mother's funeral. 7 months after Tracy's disappearance, her mother, Jean Louise Bird, also disappeared. Jean's partially clothed, decomposed body was located on October 18, 1983 in Blackbird State Forest in County, Delaware. Heavy-duty tape had been wrapped around her mouth and her face, and the cause of death was asphyxiation. Jean had last been seen 11 days prior in her son's apartment complex in Bensalem Township. She had stopped seeing Greenwald before her disappearance. They had had a troubled relationship, and once in 1980, Greenwald kidnapped her at knifepoint. Greenwald was arrested in 1984 and charged in Jean's death. He pleaded guilty to manslaughter. Officials questioned him, hoping to elicit information about Tracy's disappearance, but Greenwald admitted nothing. Greenwald was never charged in connection with Tracy's disappearance. Greenwald committed suicide in his prison cell just a day before he was to be sentenced. Greenwald was long considered a suspect in Tracy's disappearance, but investigators no longer believe he was involved. Tracy's case remains unsolved, and foul play is suspected in her disappearance. Moving on to the next case. Simon Montalvo. In a quiet suburban home in DeSoto, Texas, a family's nightmare unfolded behind closed doors, one that would take years to uncover. Simon Montalvo vanished without a trace, and it wasn't until a body was discovered outside his home, hidden beneath rocks, that the true horror began to unfold. What followed was a search for answers that stretched over 7 years, and a pursuit that took authorities across borders. Maria Leonora Montalvo and Simon Montalvo lived in DeSoto, Texas, with their 2 young sons. The couple's relationship was reportedly troubled, with signs of domestic violence. In 2012, Maria was charged with misdemeanor assault after an incident in which she allegedly threw a metal pot holder at Simon's head. However, after completing a domestic violence intervention program, the case was dismissed. Despite this history, the couple continued to live together. By 2013, they were seemingly in a strange but familiar routine. Simon, 44 years old, was reported missing by his brother in late April 2013 after not being seen for over a week. On May 4, 2013, after weeks of growing concern, the brother returned to the family home in DeSoto and made a grim discovery. While in the process of installing a camera, he smelled a strong odor coming from the backyard. Upon investigating, he found a pile of rocks along the fence, and when moved, it revealed a black bag containing Simon's body. He immediately contacted the police. Authorities confirmed that Simon had been shot 6 times, with 2 of those shots to the back of his head. Upon investigating the house, they found bloodstains throughout the master bedroom and hallway, as well as 3 bullet holes in the bedroom wall. This suggested that Simon's demise had been violent, and the circumstances pointed to someone within the household. As investigators delved deeper into the case, they learned that the couple's 2 sons were nowhere to be found. The children were eventually located in Anderson, Indiana, living with relatives about 35 miles northeast of Indianapolis. One of the boys, in a statement to the detectives, recalled hearing 3 loud claps during the night, which he initially did not understand. When he later asked his mother about the noise, she claimed it was the sound of a cabinet falling over. The boy did not believe her, suspecting it had been something more sinister. He said that the next morning, Maria took them to Indiana, and they never saw their father again. Maria's brother-in-law, Simon's brother, was the first to suspect her involvement in the crime. He knew of her history of violence towards Simon and began connecting the dots. His suspicions grew stronger, particularly after Maria's evasive behavior following Simon's disappearance. The investigation continued for years, but Maria was nowhere to be found. Although she was indicted for the crime in 2013, she had fled, and authorities struggled to track her down. It was not until May 2020, when Maria attempted to cross the border from Mexico to San Diego, that she was finally apprehended. Maria Leonor Montalvo was arrested on May 19, 2020, more than 7 years after Simon's tragic demise. At the time of her arrest, Maria was 48 years old, and authorities immediately booked her into the Dallas County Jail, charging her with the crime. Her bail was set at $500,000. Maria had evaded justice for nearly a decade, but her capture brought a sense of relief to Simon's family, who had never stopped seeking justice. Maria's arrest was met with mixed emotions. While it brought a sense of closure to Simon's family, who had fought for years to ensure justice, it also highlighted the devastating impact of her actions on their 2 sons. The children had already been traumatized by the loss of their father, and their relationship with their mother was irreparably altered by the fact that she had taken the life of their father and then fled the country. The Montalvo family rallied around the children, taking on the responsibility of raising them after the tragedy. The case is a heartbreaking example of the devastating effects of domestic violence, not only on the victims but also on the children who are often caught in the crossfire. For Maria, her arrest marked the start of a long-awaited legal process, but the damage to her family had already been done. During her sentencing on February 4, 2023, the judge condemned her actions, calling them absolutely selfish and highlighting the pain she caused her children. Maria was sentenced to 25 years in prison. However, for Simon's family, true justice will come in the form of healing their lives, something that can never truly be restored after such a tragedy. Moving on to the next case. Tina Prince. In the peaceful town of Sandusville, Georgia, a cherished first-grade teacher mysteriously disappeared on a spring evening in 2021. What started as a typical evening, dinner with family and a short phone call, soon spiraled into a puzzling case that would leave authorities stumped for months. Her car was discovered abandoned, and her possessions were gone. The only lead was a single stop at a convenience store before her disappearance. The investigation into Tina Prince's vanishing would last for weeks, ultimately revealing a disturbing truth about the man last seen with her. Tina Prince, a 46-year-old teacher, was beloved for her kindness and commitment to her students. On the evening of May 28, 2021, she had dinner with her family at Puebla's Mexican restaurant in Sandusville. Witnesses reported that she stepped away from the table to take a phone call. A server, who knew Tina as a regular patron, remembered seeing her leave the restaurant and get into her car. That would be the final time anyone saw Tina alive. Tina's car was later found in the parking lot of a Walmart, but there were no signs of her or her belongings. The vehicle appeared abandoned with no clear explanation for her sudden disappearance. Surveillance footage from a convenience store near the Walmart showed Tina stopping on her way to meet a male acquaintance, a key lead that would soon be crucial in the investigation. As authorities worked to piece together the events of that night, they learned that the man Tina had gone to meet was 31-year-old Aaron Adams. Adams was identified as a male acquaintance, who had known Tina for some time. Initially, Adams was said to be cooperative with the investigators. But as the investigation continued, and Tina's body was found in a wooded area in Washington County, it became clear that Adams' cooperation had been a lie. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation performed an autopsy on the remains, which confirmed the body was that of Tina Prince. The cause of fatality was later revealed to be an overdose, compounded by the presence of fentanyl and an antidepressant in her system. Investigators believed that Tina had overdosed and Adams had concealed her demise by dumping her body in the woods and lying about the circumstances of her disappearance. The investigation into Tina's slaying took months, with authorities trying to piece together the puzzle from the limited evidence left behind. Adams initially misled investigators, claiming he had no involvement in her disappearance. But his statements did not align with the evidence. Surveillance footage and witness testimonies pointed to his presence near the area where Tina's car was found. And eventually, it became clear that he had tried to hide her demise after she overdosed. Investigators also discovered that Adams' lack of cooperation had caused significant delays in the investigation. Had he told the truth, the search for Tina's body might have been much shorter. Instead, his false statements only added more confusion to the already difficult case. It was not until nearly 2 years after her demise that Adams was arrested and charged with multiple crimes related to the concealment of her slaying. In June 2021, he was arrested and charged with 1 count of concealing the slaying of another and 6 counts of making false statements. He was initially charged in connection with the end of Tina, but denied any involvement in her actual slaying. After nearly 2 years of legal proceedings, Adams entered a non-negotiated guilty plea. This meant that Adams was not attempting to strike a deal with the state, but rather accepting responsibility for his actions. The plea was seen as a long-awaited step toward justice for Tina and her family. During his sentencing, on February 15, 2023, Adams was handed a 40-year prison sentence with 35 years to be served consecutively to an existing sentence he was already serving, which would end in 2027. His guilty plea brought some closure to a case that had left many questions unanswered. But it also left a lingering sense of grief for the family of Tina, who had been waiting for justice for so long. The closure of Tina's case has brought some sense of resolution to the community and her grieving family. Though the damage done can never be undone. District Attorney Tripp Fitzner, who oversaw the case, expressed his hope that the guilty plea would offer some peace to Tina's loved ones. He recognized that, although the criminal justice system could not undo the harm caused, the resolution of the case brought a sense of justice to the heartbreaking situation. Tina's loved ones continue to grieve her loss, remembering her not only as a victim but also as a devoted teacher who made a lasting impact on countless young lives. While justice has been served, the emotional weight of her tragic end will always affect those who were close to her. Aaron Adams, now serving a lengthy prison sentence, will spend the coming decades reflecting on the consequences of his actions. For Tina's family, the path to closure has been long and filled with pain. But with Adams' guilty plea and sentencing, they can begin to heal, knowing that justice was finally served. Moving on to the next case. Suzanne Gloria Lyle. Suzanne Gloria Lyle, a 19-year-old sophomore at the State University of New York in Albany, was studying computer science and working part-time at Babbage's in Crossgates Mall in Guilderland, New York. Her job was just 2 miles from campus, and she typically took the bus to get there. On March 2, 1998, after completing her midterm exam, Suzanne headed to her part-time job at Babbage's around 4 p.m. The store closed around 9 p.m., and Susan left the mall to catch the bus back to her campus dormitory at approximately 9:20 p.m. A classmate of Suzanne reported seeing her get off the bus at Collins Circle around 9:45 p.m., just a 3 to 5 minute walk from her dormitory. However, Suzanne never made it back to her dorm and was not seen again. The following day, Suzanne's boyfriend, Richard Condon, contacted Suzanne's parents to inform them that Suzanne had not returned to her dorm and was not answering his calls. Richard and Suzanne had been in a relationship for 2 years, and despite attending different colleges in the Albany area, Suzanne would always call him after returning to her dorm from work. Her parents, Doug and Mary Lyle, immediately reported her missing. At first, the police did not take the case seriously as they believed she was an adult, and it was common for college students to take a trip without notifying anybody. Her parents told police that she was not the type of teenager to leave without telling anybody. Her father told the police, quote, Susie was not a risk taker. She didn't party or use alcohol or drugs. Suzanne's roommates told the police that she never returned home on March 2nd as they usually heard her jingling keys whenever she returned. Still, police believed that she would reappear in a few days and did not launch a missing persons search. 2 days later, when Suzanne did not return to her dorm room and did not attend her other midterms or classes. The police officially considered it a missing persons case. It was later found that a day after Suzanne disappeared, her ATM card was used to withdraw $20 from her bank account. The withdrawal was made at a Stewart Shop convenience store in Albany at around 4 p.m. The store was approximately 2.5 miles from her college dorm room. It is unclear who withdrew the money as the area around the ATM was not covered by CCTV. It is worth noting that the person withdrawing the money did know the PIN as they put in the correct PIN on the first try. Her boyfriend stated that only Suzanne and he knew the PIN to her ATM card. The store clerk was questioned, but he did not recognize Suzanne. Her parents said that the Stewart's convenience store was not a part of the city that Suzanne would have gone to voluntarily. Suzanne's boyfriend, Richard, was questioned, and he said that he was playing games online with a friend the night that she went missing. His friend corroborated his alibi. Even though he is not named a suspect in her disappearance, Suzanne's parents feel that he may be involved. Her mother, Mary, said that their relationship was rocky and that Suzanne had tried to break up with him several times, but had agreed to stay when he got upset. Richard later stopped cooperating with the police, declined to take a polygraph test, and refused to answer any further questions without his attorney present. A co-worker of Suzanne's later told authorities that Suzanne had mentioned being stalked by an unknown individual about a month before her disappearance. However, Suzanne seemed unafraid of this person, and it remains unclear whether they are connected to her disappearance. Since then, there have been no new developments, and the case remains open and unsolved. Moving on to the next case. The Bowles family. On August 13, 1965, James Bowles, his wife Darlene, and their sons Robert and Thomas moved into a cabin in Crestline, California. When an entire weekend passed without any contact from them, James' mother grew concerned. She began calling other relatives in James' workplace to check if anyone had heard from the family. It became clear that no one had been in touch with the Bowles family since the day they moved. Darlene's brother, Floyd, reached out to the construction company responsible for building the cabin and asked them to check on the family. However, Floyd never received any follow-up from them. Floyd then reached out to the San Bernardino Sheriff's Office to request a wellness check on the family. The Sheriff's Office assured him they would forward the request to the local substation. However, Floyd never received any updates. Growing increasingly worried, he decided to visit Crestline himself to check on his sister and her family. He asked one of his employees, who knew the area well, to accompany him. They arrived at the cabin around 5 p.m. Upon arrival, they noticed that the family car was not parked in the driveway. They walked up on the deck to look in the windows. Through the window, Floyd saw a family's dog on the couch covered in blood and not moving. Going into the cabin alone, Floyd headed past the empty living room and kitchen and discovered the 4 bodies of Bowles' family in the master bedroom. Each member of the family had been shot multiple times with .22 caliber bullets. At 5:10 p.m., Floyd notified the police. When the police arrived at the cabin, they found James lying on his back on the floor of the bedroom in a pool of blood. 13-year-old Bobby was found in a sitting position back to the wall. Darlene was found in a crouched position in the closet, indicating she had been shielding her youngest son, Tommy, at the time of their death. They also found blood smears in the living room and dinette area, which seemed to lead to the back bedroom. 35 .22 caliber shell casings were found in the cabin, 5 in the living room and 30 in the bedroom where the family was killed. Blood smears on the bedding in the master bedroom seemed to indicate that a weapon might have been wiped clean on the bed. Detectives were also able to find footprints in the size 11 in the cabin. Detectives searched outside the cabin for footprints, but it had rained on Sunday, the night before the bodies were discovered, so they had no luck. The wallet James carried was found in the cabin but contained no money. About 65 yards away from the cabin, their car was located and detectives staked it out for a while in case the suspect returned, but again, no luck. A local paper boat confirmed that the car had been there since at least 6 a.m. on Sunday, August 15th. A canvass of the area turned off very little clues, as most other cabins within reasonable distance were part-timers and had been empty for the weekend. The only exception the first day of canvassing was the Ogles, who had seen James on the evening of Saturday 14th. He seemed in good spirits, and they had chatted for a few minutes before they had said their goodbyes. The Ogles hadn't heard anything unusual, but said they probably wouldn't have, as there was a very large party happening a few streets away, and they had been trying to ignore the noise. Another witness said the family ate dinner at the local St. Moritz club Saturday evening, and James seemed visibly upset after making a phone call. Yet another contact stated James had told them the family was going to have a visitor around 8 p.m. on the evening of Saturday 14th. Several witnesses had spotted two unfamiliar cars parked in the family's driveway. Over the next year, the investigation stalled due to lack of clues and strong suspects. Several suspects with no motive but who were in the vicinity were vetted and cleared. The most promising suspect in the case was George Robert Stewart, who was wanted in Alabama under a mental warrant, and was also suspected in the murder of the Evans brothers, two young boys he had molested while staying with their family. Stewart had worked at a church camp on the mountain near the Twin Peaks area. The church confirmed that it had been closed that particular weekend, leaving Stewart free to go wherever he wanted. Authorities questioned him and administered a polygraph test, which he failed. However, after Stewart provided evidence that he had been in New Orleans at the time of the murders, he was cleared and subsequently released. With no suspect, the brutal murders of the Bowles family is still unsolved. Moving on to the next case. Thora Chamberlain. Thora Afton Chamberlain was last seen outside Campbell High School in Campbell, California, after finishing her classes on the afternoon of November 2, 1945. The 14-year-old had planned to attend a football game later that day, but as she was leaving the school, she was approached by a man in a vehicle on Winchester Road. Classmates observed her talking to the man, who appeared to be a serviceman in a Navy uniform. The man asked Thora if she could babysit his sister's children for the afternoon, explaining that they needed someone on short notice. Thora, unaware of the potential danger, got into the man's car and was never seen or heard from again. Soon after, authorities identified their prime suspect, 31-year-old Thomas Henry McMonigle, a career criminal. McMonigle began to claim responsibility for Thora's murder, but initially, police were skeptical. His accounts of the crime were inconsistent. Sometimes he said he had stabbed her, other times he claimed he had shot or strangled her. At one point, he suggested that she had fallen out of his car and died accidentally, and at other times, he even denied having killed her at all. McMonigle's criminal history included charges for assaults, vagrancy, and attempted rape. He had previously attacked another young girl, which led investigators to consider him as a possible suspect in Thora Chamberlain's disappearance. However, the family of the young girl had chosen not to press charges. After becoming the primary suspect in Thora's case, McMonigle fled to his father's home in Illinois. On December 6th, he returned to California, traveling by bus to San Francisco. He attempted to take his own life on the bus by overdosing on sleeping pills, but he soon recovered after being treated at a hospital. Immediately following his discharge, he was arrested by the FBI. Several of Thora's classmates identified him as the man in the car who was speaking to her. At some point, he claimed that he had simply asked her for directions, and they had driven around together so she could show him where he wanted to go. He said he later became drowsy and pulled over to sleep, and when he awoke, Thora was gone. It was quickly discovered that McMonigle was not an ex-serviceman, but rather he had stolen a Foot Locker from one which contains the Navy-issued clothing and military medals, which he was seen wearing on the day Thor vanished. The locker was recovered from the garage of his home. Eventually, the 31-year-old told the authorities that he'd shot the teenager accidentally while she was in the car and she had bled on the upholstery. He later ripped out the fabric and buried it. The FBI gathered this physical evidence from where it was buried in a drainage ditch near McMonigle's workplace and found that, just as he said, it was stained with human blood. A bullet hole was also discovered in the door of his car, which was also consistent with his statement. The bullet was found buried in his garden by the FBI, and they confirmed that it had been fired from his .32 caliber Colt revolver. Much like his differing statements about what happened to Thora, McMonagall gave varying accounts about what happened to her body afterwards. In one story, he said he'd thrown it off a steep 350-foot cliff known as the Devil's Slide, which overlooked Half Moon Bay on the coast. This version is the most widely believed. Divers attempted to search for the body but to no avail. However, one journalist in 1945 noted it was possible the force of the water had broken Thora's body apart. Searches of the cliff did, however, turn up 2 pairs of socks, one blue and one red, which matched the 14-year-old's clothing the day she vanished. The socks were located in 2 different crevices partway down the cliff face, and the teenager's parents identified them. As McMonagall had been working on a construction site at the time of Thora's disappearance, authorities suspected he'd used it as a dumping site, and sure enough, they discovered that he'd sought permission from his boss to fill in a nearby ditch with dirt and concrete blocks. Beneath the debris, investigators found Thora's shoes, school books, paper, binder, and her cowbell. McMonagall went on to tell authorities that her clothes were buried in his garden, but an excavation of it turned up no further evidence of the missing 14-year-old. Ultimately, although Thora's body was never found, McMonagall was charged with her murder. Prosecutors theorized that he killed her after she turned down his advances and that he tossed her body off the cliff where it was carried out to sea. The jury deliberated for just 38 minutes before delivering a guilty verdict, and McMonagall was sentenced to death. Although the 31-year-old claimed to have killed 11 people, law enforcement did not pursue any additional charges, as he was already set to be executed. In February 1948, McMonagall was executed in the gas chamber. Just before his death, he retracted all of his previous statements, insisting he was innocent and had no involvement in Thora Chamberlain's disappearance. Moving on to the next case. Betsy Ertzmer. Betsy Ruth Ertzmer, born on July 11, 1947, in Holland, Michigan, was just 22 years old when her life was tragically cut short. The youngest of 4 children, Betsy initially studied English and art at the University of Michigan before transferring to Pennsylvania State University after graduation. Her long-term boyfriend, David Wright, was a medical school student at the same university. Reflecting on the loss of his girlfriend years later, David often wondered what might have happened if Betsy had stayed with him that weekend when she was murdered. David had planned to marry Betsy. On November 28, 1969, she was in the library working on a research paper when fellow students found her collapsed on the floor. Bystanders assumed she had suffered a seizure or fainted and began performing CPR. The campus hospital was alerted, and by 5:19 p.m., an ambulance took Betsy to the Ridenour Health Center, where she was pronounced dead shortly after. It wasn't until doctors examined her body that they discovered she had been stabbed once through the left breast. Betsy was wearing a red dress that concealed her blood, and she had bled into her lungs, leaving little blood around the wound. Investigators later concluded that she had probably been stabbed from behind, as there were no defensive injuries on her hands or arms. They theorized that Betsy was likely familiar with her killer and did not fear him. Reportedly, just minutes after the stabbing, 1 or 2 men left the library and told the clerk, "Somebody better help that girl." One witness claimed there was only one blonde man. It's unknown whether it was 1 or 2 men, and in either case he or they remain unidentified. On the back of the murder, police began their investigation and held 5,000 interviews in the course of it. They made no arrests and pinned down few suspects. Nobody seemed to have a bad word to say about Betsy, and she was described as smart and good-natured and had no known enemies. Whilst David Wright, her boyfriend, was considered a person of interest initially, he was quickly ruled out when their good relationship was vouched for by those who knew the couple. And according to friends, he didn't leave the study group he was in on the day of the murder, providing him with a rock-solid alibi. Witnesses were few and far between in Betsy's case. Some reported hearing a scream, while others told of the sound of falling books or shelves, likely from when the student collapsed among the stacks in the library. Consequently, 3 drawings were released of witnesses that police couldn't track down. But unfortunately, these illustrations were highly generic, and it appears that the witnesses were never found. The murder weapon was also never recovered, leaving investigators with little to go on. To make matters worse, the murder scene had actually been cleaned up by a janitor after Betsy was taken to hospital, leaving police with even less to work with as any crime scene clues were now gone. Despite the lack of leads or information, police did eventually find several suspects. An early suspect in the case was a man named Robert Durgee, a 27-year-old English professor who died in a car crash in Michigan about 3 weeks after the murder. He was investigated and cleared, although it's unknown what drew him into the eye of the police as a person of interest in the first place. It was also briefly speculated that the infamous Ted Bundy was responsible for the killing, as he'd attended Temple University in Pennsylvania in 1969 and was a frequent visitor of university libraries. However, he was also ruled out. Another fleeting suspect was some kind of military man given the precision of the wound. It was later theorized that perhaps Betsy had stumbled upon a gay couple or encounter and was killed so that she wouldn't tell of anything she'd witnessed. This was thought because when a black light was used on the area where she was found, it revealed human bodily fluids. But the stacks were notorious for couples doing drugs and having sex, so it couldn't really be determined that Betsy had seen anything. The biggest suspect in the case was a man named Richard Hefner, sometimes referred to as Rick. Just hours after the murder, before the news broke, Hefner went to the home of his Penn State professor and asked if they had heard the news about Betsy. It seems that Richard had dated the 22-year-old woman for a brief time, and Hefner told police that their relationship came to an end in October of 1969. Despite the fact that at the time, Betsy had been dating David Wright and they'd been discussing marriage. Hefner told authorities that he didn't know of the murder until the day after it had occurred, contradicting the account that he'd gone to his professor's home to tell of the news of her death. Despite the suspicious circumstances around Hefner, he was never investigated any further. Worryingly, those who knew him referred to him as a sociopath. He reportedly once drove 800 miles to proclaim his love to a woman he barely knew on her doorstep. He also once punctured a neighbor's tire with a knife, and threw dog waste through another neighbor's car window. 6 years later in 1975, Hefner was arrested for molesting a 13-year-old boy, but the trial resulted in a hung jury. After this, he had frequent run-ins with the law. In 1992, he was accused of inappropriate behavior with a child. And in 1998, he was charged with assaulting a woman in a parking lot, which resulted in the victim receiving a dislocated jaw and loosening several teeth. It's widely believed by online spectators and crime authors that Hefner was responsible for the murder of his one-time girlfriend. Although it's unknown why he seemed switched from harming women to young boys, an odd leap to say the least. According to Hefner's nephew, he once heard his mother shout, "You killed that girl and now you're killing me." Betsy's nephew is convinced that Hefner was responsible for her murder. Hefner passed away in 2002, and to this day, it remains uncertain whether he was truly behind the crime. Betsy's family never saw justice for her death, and her former boyfriend, David Wright, continues to wonder about what could have been. 50 years later, Betsy's case remains unsolved. Moving on to the next case. Brian Ninsfield. In January 1997, Brian Dylan Ninsfield was an 18-year-old freshman at Roger Williams University in Bristol, Rhode Island. He was in his second semester and known for being reserved, with a small circle of friends. Having experienced his parents' divorce during childhood, Brian and his parents mutually decided on Roger Williams University because of its welcoming, home-like environment. Brian often felt homesick while pursuing his architecture course. In his free time, he enjoyed reading and listening to music by the water near Mount Hope Bridge. However, he was known to feel overwhelmed by the academic demands and struggled to keep up with his studies. On January 31st, Brian's life began to take a troubling turn when he received a disturbing phone call from a former Roger Williams University student. The caller threatened him, claiming he could still access the campus. Following the call, at around 12:30 a.m., Brian contacted his father, asking him to come to the university. Brian's father advised him to contact campus security, but their only suggestion was to change his phone number. A week later, on February 6th, After finishing his literature class, Brian disappeared and was never seen again. His parents were not informed about his disappearance until February 12th. When they arrived at his dorm room, it appeared untouched, but his mother, Marianne, noticed sand in his bed, which alarmed her since Brian was known for being very clean and organized. Not long after his disappearance, Marianne received a call from a woman claiming to be connected to the university. The caller alleged that a school administrator and 2 faculty members were withholding critical information about Brian and his case. However, the line then went dead. Nothing further has come of this lead, and the woman on the other end of the phone has never been identified. 6 months later in September, Labor Day weekend, a mother and daughter walking along the Hog Island beach located a few miles from Brian's school stumbled across the ghastly discovery of a shoe on the shore, which contained part of a foot inside. DNA showed that the limb belonged to Brian, as did a shin bone that was found nearby. No other remains have ever been found, and the student was presumed dead upon the gruesome discovery. Eventually, the man who had made the threatening phone calls to Brian was identified. He was a former student named Josh Cohen, and was pointed out by campus officials. While Josh and Brian were friends during Brian's first semester, it has been suggested that the two were possibly romantically involved, although no one can say for certain. It's alleged that the relationship ended just weeks before Brian's disappearance. While Cohen admitted to making the phone calls, he claimed they were all in jest. Authorities do not believe that Josh Cohen is involved with Brian's disappearance. There are several theories regarding the case of Brian Ninsfield. Police speculate he accidentally fell into the river beneath Mount Hope Bridge, or that perhaps he jumped from the bridge itself. His parents believe their son fell victim to foul play, and that Cohen, who had made the distressing phone calls, was responsible. Another theory put forward by online investigators is that perhaps Cohen was going to come forward about their relationship, and Brian committed suicide as a result, as he was unhappy or uncomfortable with the decision. Brian's parents largely blamed Roger Williams University for failing to notify them when their son vanished. As the first 24 hours are so precious in a missing persons case, they felt they'd have had a better chance of finding Brian alive had they been alerted sooner. His father, Stephen, said, "I remember just this uncaring, unsympathetic, unconcerned attitude by the university." Stephen and Marianne later went on to sue the school, although it's uncertain if they won their case or not. They also pushed for a national law requiring faster parental notification when a student goes missing. Roger Williams University exhibited questionable behavior regarding Brian Ninsfield's disappearance. Reportedly, someone in the admissions office instructed university tour guides to tell anyone asking about Brian that he was safe at home with his parents. Additionally, there were allegations that individuals at the university were subtly discouraged from providing information, though the exact methods remain unclear. Staff members were also reportedly directed not to answer any student inquiries about the case. Minimal action seems to have been taken concerning Brian's disappearance, which was largely brushed aside by both the university and local law enforcement. The reasons behind this lack of attention remain unclear, but without proper action from officials, Brian's case may remain unsolved indefinitely. Moving on to the next case. Carlina Renee White. Carlina Renee White was born on July 15, 1987, at Harlem Hospital Center in New York City. When she was 19 days old, her parents, Joy White and Carl Tyson, took her back to the hospital after she developed a high fever. A woman, dressed as a nurse, assisted the parents upon their arrival. Unbeknownst to them, this woman was not actually a hospital employee. In the early hours of the morning, she took Carlina from the hospital, kidnapping her. At the time, the hospital's video surveillance system was not functioning, leaving Carlina's parents as the only ones able to describe the woman who took their daughter. This marked the first baby abduction from a New York hospital. Despite widespread distribution of flyers featuring Carlina's image across the country, efforts to locate her proved unsuccessful. In response, her parents filed a $100 million lawsuit against the hospital, ultimately securing a $750,000 settlement. The woman that took Carlina is Anujita and Pedwick. She raised Carlina as Nedra and Ned in Connecticut. Carlina first suspected that, and might not be a real mother, when it could not provide a birth certificate. In 2005, when Carlina fell pregnant and asked again, and provided her with a false certificate. The officials noticed it was forged, however. Carlina then confronted Anne, and confessed then as she was not Carlina's real mother. She lied, however, by telling Carlina as she was abandoned by a drug addict. This caused her to not immediately go look for her real parents. When she was 23 years old, she had started looking on websites for missing people such as the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. There she found a picture of the kidnapped Carlina and noticed that it's similar to the baby pictures she have of herself as Nedra and those of her daughter Sumani. She used the hotline to finally get into contact with her birth family. DNA would prove in 2011 that she is indeed the missing Carlina White. And Pedway is currently serving a 12-year prison sentence in a federal correctional institution in Aliceville, Alabama for the abduction. Carlina now goes by the name Mitty since it is a name she gave herself. She does have a relationship with her biological parents, and they are making up for lost time. Moving on to the next case. Daisy Evelyn Shelton. What if a long unsolved mystery from the past were to unfold, uncovering dark secrets and concealed truths? How would a community cope with the revelation of a brutal crime after decades of uncertainty? And what occurs when a confession finally offers new hope in solving a cold case? In June 1964, a fisherman discovered a dismembered human arm in a gravel pit east of Tipp City, located along State Route 571 in Ohio. This horrifying find led to a thorough search to uncover the remainder of the remains. Attempts to drain the gravel pit were unsuccessful, leaving investigators frustrated and in search of new clues. 4 days later, another fisherman uncovered a disturbing find: a burlap bag in a section of the old Miami-Erie Canal. Inside the bag was a dismembered human torso. The mystery deepened as a head and a leg were later discovered in the same canal, gradually revealing more of the grim puzzle. The remains were identified as 43-year-old Daisy Evelyn Shelton, a mother from Dayton, Ohio. Daisy resided on Springfield Street and was employed at Delco, an automotive electronics company. According to a missing persons report filed by her daughter, Rita, Daisy was last seen in late August 1963. She had told her daughter that she would return home soon, but never did. Known for her generous nature, Daisy was always there to support those around her and was beloved by her family for her helpfulness. Her life had been brutally cut short, and the circumstances of her demise sent shock waves through the community. Despite the initial fervor of the investigation, leads quickly dried up and the case grew cold. Decades passed without resolution until 2017 when an unexpected break in the case emerged. In a twist that could only be described as fate, a man fearing he was near his end in a hospital bed made a startling confession to a nurse. He claimed to have witnessed the slaying of Daisy Shelton. Fearing his own impending death, the man felt compelled to confess, disclosing long-hidden truths. Miraculously, he survived, and detectives seized the opportunity to interview him. The witness, whose identity was kept confidential for his safety, shared a chilling account of the events leading to Daisy's murder. His vivid recollection of the crime provided crucial details that had eluded investigators back in 1964, offering new insights into a case that had remained unresolved for decades. The witness recounted that he saw an individual take her life by striking her on the head with a hammer at a home on Springfield Street in Dayton. The brutality of the act left a mark on the witness, who described the scene in grim detail. After the initial blow, Daisy Shelton was dismembered in the home by 2 more men. Her body parts were then discarded in various bodies of water in and around Tipp City. Effectively, scattering the evidence made the investigation more challenging for the authorities at the time. The suspect, who was the only one linked to the hammer, cooperated with detectives and agreed to several interviews. Initially, he firmly denied knowing Daisy Shelton, even though they lived on the same street and worked for the same company. However, during an interview in August 2017, his facade began to unravel. Hesitantly, he confessed to knowing Daisy, marking a crucial turning point in the investigation. As the interviews progressed, detectives meticulously pieced together the suspect's movements and interactions with Daisy. They discovered inconsistencies in his statements and unexplained gaps in his alibi for the time of Daisy's slaying. The pressure mounted as forensic evidence combined with the witness's detailed account painted an increasingly damning picture of the suspect's involvement. Detectives explored the possibility of personal vendettas, financial disputes, and other motives that could have led to her brutal slaying. To build a comprehensive case, detectives turned to modern forensic techniques. They re-examined the burlap bag and other physical evidence, hoping to find DNA traces or fingerprints that could irrefutably link the suspect to the crime. Advances in forensic science allowed them to analyze the evidence with a precision that was unimaginable in 1964. Simultaneously, the community's response to the reopened case was mixed. For some, the resurfacing of such a horrific crime brought back painful memories, while for others, it reignited a long-dormant hope for justice. Media coverage of the case intensified, with many in Dayton and Tipp City following the developments closely. The suspect himself brought up the topic of a box voluntarily, suggesting he could explain why his DNA might be found out. He claimed it was all a setup, orchestrated by the eyewitness to implicate him. Despite his attempt to deflect suspicion, he admitted that the box had indeed been in his home on Springfield Street. The suspect conceded that a box from his house had been used to carry Daisy's body parts. This admission was a critical breakthrough. The suspect further admitted that it was possible Daisy had lost her life in his home. This was a significant shift from his previous answers, aligning more closely with the witness's account. These admissions combined with the forensic evidence strengthened the case against him. The suspect confessed that he looked guilty and could possibly be convicted in court. He admitted that the mounting evidence, his connection to the box, the location of the slaying, and his relationship with Daisy painted a damning picture. Despite his claims of being framed, his own statements had inadvertently solidified his status as the prime suspect in Daisy's case. Detectives continued to build their case, piecing together the timeline of events leading up to Daisy's demise. They scrutinized the suspect's background, seeking any history of violent behavior or other potential motives. In light of the new evidence and the suspect's partial confessions, the case against him grew stronger. The prosecution prepared to present a comprehensive narrative that would encompass the witness testimony, forensic findings, and the suspect's own incriminating statements. The goal was to provide a clear and convincing argument that would lead to a conviction and finally bring justice to Daisy Shelton. The witness testified at a grand jury hearing but lost his life before the suspect could be prosecuted. The suspect, who was not named, passed away in September 2022 at the age of 92. Despite his demise, the grand jury hearing provided crucial insights into the case. They revealed the depth of the investigation and the compelling evidence gathered against him. The suspect's testimony and the findings were meticulously documented, ensuring that Daisy Shelton's story would not fade into obscurity. Law enforcement officials and legal experts analyzed the suspect's testimony and the accumulated evidence. They strived to piece together a comprehensive account of the crime. The courage of the eyewitness, who broke his silence after so many years, was instrumental in reigniting the case. His detailed confession, alongside the suspect's reluctant admissions, solidified the narrative of Daisy Shelton's tragic end. Although the suspect's demise precluded a formal trial, the investigation's transparency brought some solace to the community. Public statements from detectives affirmed that every effort had been made to uncover the truth and bring justice to light. Finally, after 60 years, on March 29, 2024, the Miami County Sheriff's Office announced that prosecutor Anthony Kendall determined Daisy Shelton's case was solved. They decided this due to the confession from the suspect, who has now passed away, as well as other evidence. Daisy's granddaughter, Maria Walling, said that her father, Rodney, also passed away before learning what happened to his mom. Maria said they never found the slayer when they found all the body parts, and it really messed him up. She knows the names of the men involved in her grandmother's slaying, but deputies will not release them. I am like, finally, they found the perpetrators. There were 3. I can't help but feel for the families who will soon learn the truth about how my grandmother's life was taken. While Daisy's family now knows who was responsible for her death, the police have yet to determine a clear motive. Though Daisy Shelton's case may never reach a courtroom verdict, the tireless search for justice, fueled by modern forensic advancements and the courage of a key witness, has ensured that her story is no longer forgotten by time. Moving on to the next case. Benjamin Kyle. On August 31, 2004, at 5 a.m., a Burger King employee in Richmond Hill, Georgia, made an alarming discovery. Behind the restaurant, he found a man who was unconscious, sunburned, and completely naked. The man seemed to have been there for some time, as his body was covered in numerous ant bites. The employee immediately contacted emergency services, and the man was transported to Candler Hospital in Savannah for medical care. Without any identification on him, the man was initially recorded as Burger King Doe in the hospital records. It took 2 weeks for him to regain consciousness. Once awake, he stated that he believed his name was Benjamin, and he chose the last name Kyle, explaining that his initials could match the name of the place where he was found. Afterward, Benjamin was transferred to Memorial Health University Medical Center for further care. They noticed that he had cataracts in both his eyes. A charity was kind enough to pay for his operation to get it removed. Finally, 9 months after he was found, he could see himself in a mirror. Benjamin was surprised to see that he was 20 years older than he believed he was. The next few years, Benjamin spent time in shelters and care centers. In 2007, he was diagnosed with dissociative amnesia. Benjamin also spent some time being homeless. It was hard finding a job since he couldn't remember his social security number. There were some people that tried to help him remember things from his past so that he could find his family. They looked through missing person databases, but he wasn't in there. What did help though was he started to remember certain things. He remembered that he was born 10 years before Michael Jackson. The part of his social security number he could later remember was consistent with numbers assigned in Wisconsin, Michigan, Illinois, and Indiana. In 2015, with advances in DNA technology, his sample was taken so it could be entered into a database. Parabon Nanolabs, led by C. Moore, led the way in the search for his real identity. Initial results that came back showed that his last name is most likely Powell and that he is a descendant of a 19th century man named Abraham Lovely Powell. On September 16, 2015, he announced that his real identity has been found. He now knew his real name and close family members. In 2016, he said that his real name is William Burgess Powell. He was born on August 29, 1948 in Lafayette, Indiana. So, he remembered correctly that he was born 10 years before Michael Jackson. In 1976, he cut ties with his family and moved to Boulder, Colorado. It's still not really known what happened to him, as it led to him being found. Moving on to the next case. Andrew Gosden. In 2007, Andrew lived with his parents and sister in Doncaster. On the morning of September 14th, he prepared for school, but instead of attending, he waited in a nearby park until his parents had left for work. Afterward, he returned home, changed out of his uniform, placed it in the washing machine, and took his PSP, leaving the charger behind. There was 100 pounds in his room, but Andrew did not take this money. Instead, he withdrew 200 pounds from his bank account, went to Doncaster railway station, and bought a one-way ticket to London before boarding the 9:35 a.m. train to King's Cross. Witnesses saw him getting on the train alone. The ticket seller at Doncaster recalled Andrew because he declined a return ticket, despite it costing only £0.5 more. Eyewitnesses on the train later reported seeing Andrew, describing him as quiet, and noted that he played with his PSP throughout the journey. He would be captured on CCTV at approximately 11:20 a.m. CCTV imagery of Gosden at King's Cross was not checked until 27 days after his disappearance, by which time the trail had gone cold. CCTV images showed Andrew leaving King's Cross station on the day that he vanished. That was the last confirmed sighting of him. 1 year after Andrew's disappearance, an unidentified man spoke into the intercom at the doorway to Leominster Police Station, claiming to have information about the case. When an officer arrived to answer the door, however, the man had disappeared. There were fears that Andrew may have been groomed by someone that he met online. This was investigated, but searches of his sister's laptop, which he occasionally used, and the school computers found nothing. His parents held the belief that he did not have any social media or email accounts that they were aware of. He also did not own a mobile phone. There was speculation that Andrew may have traveled to the capital to end his own life. His family doubted this but did not rule it out. They paid a company to search the Thames using sonar equipment. A body was found, but it was not Andrew. A further theory was that Andrew ran away in search of a new life. It was reported that his favorite TV show featured a character that left his old life and changed his identity. His parents have continued to put money in his bank account just in case he needs it. However, it has remained untouched since the day he left. After more than 10 years, there is still no trace of Andrew Gostin or any explanation for his mysterious train trip. Before I continue, I want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch my videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy my content, consider subscribing. It's free and you can always change your mind later. Now, let's move on with the video. Moving on to the next case. Denise Balser. Denise Balser was a 24-year-old woman residing in Raymond, New Hampshire, and working as a bookkeeper for a small company. On January 17, 1985, she vanished, leaving behind only one clue, a note. When her husband returned home, he discovered the message, which read, "We've got your wife." A few days later, authorities located her pickup truck parked at Logan Airport in Boston. Denise's social security card, birth certificate, and credit cards were neatly arranged and left in the car. Authorities initially pursued the theory that she had been kidnapped but found no substantial evidence beyond the cryptic note. Later, they considered the possibility that she had left voluntarily, though her close-knit family suspected foul play. A year after her disappearance, Denise was indicted in absentia for embezzling $12,000 from her employer. With no further leads, the case eventually went cold. That was until 17 years later in 2002. It was then that the FBI believed that they found her. She was now going by the name of Denise Jones. She was still a bookkeeper and had started a new family. 42-year-old Denise was elated to see her family when they knocked on the door. She explained that her boss wanted to end her life because of the embezzlement. Denise claimed that it was closer to a $100,000 that she embezzled. The county prosecutors dropped the charges against her because her former boss was long deceased. Denise lived in South Carolina, the Bahamas, California, and Hawaii, while she was missing and lived in Florida since 1996. Her current husband was stunned, but said a lot of things that didn't make sense before did now. Denise would always be depressed on Mother's Day and out of sorts on holidays. She never talked about her family. Moving on to the next case. Derek Michael Mason. In January 1992, the remains of an unidentified individual were found alongside the Pennsylvania Turnpike in Clay Township, Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. The Pennsylvania State Police, PSP, responded to the scene and determined that the remains belonged to a male, estimated to be 5 feet 10 inches tall and between 18 and 30 years old. The cause of death was believed to be homicide. At the time of his discovery, the man was wearing a light blue long-sleeve sweater from Kate Collins and a size 36 pair of men's Fruit of the Loom jockey-style underwear. The man also had a scar on his chest from a previous bullet wound that had healed. In April 2017, details of the case were entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System. Despite extensive efforts by law enforcement investigators to identify the man, no matches were found. The case went cold due to a lack of viable leads. In 2022, the Pennsylvania State Police submitted forensic evidence to Othram. Othram scientists successfully developed a DNA extract from the forensic evidence. They used forensic-grade genome sequencing to build a comprehensive DNA profile for the unknown man. After successfully completing the process, the DNA profile was delivered to a PSP analyst, who performed the necessary work to generate new investigative leads in the case. A follow-up investigation was conducted using the new leads that led investigators to potential relatives of the man. This investigation led to the positive identification of the man, who is now known to be Derek Michael Mason. Derek was last seen leaving his home in the 500 block of South 39th Street in West Philadelphia in October 1991. Derek was known in the area by the names Hawkeye and Hawk. He was never reported missing. Anyone with information regarding the slaying of Derek Mason is asked to contact Trooper Brian McNally, PSP Lancaster, at 717-290-1967. PSP Tips is offering a $2,000 reward for any information that leads to an arrest in this case. Moving on to the next case. Kieran and Ornith Murphy. Kieran and Ornith Murphy were an Irish couple who relocated to the United States in the 1960s. Kieran worked as an actuary for San Francisco's Employee Retirement System office, while Ornith was an expert solo sailor. Ornith was well known in the sailing community and occasionally contributed to sailing magazines. She owned a 1980 39-foot fiberglass auxiliary sailboat named Sola 3. The vessel featured dark blue circular emblems with a gray swirl painted on both sides, making it easily recognizable. The couple lived in San Francisco and had two sons, David and Patrick. Kieran did not know how to sail, and being on the water made him seasick, but he did help with the maintenance of the boat. They had amassed a small fortune through real estate speculation. For years, Kieran and Ornith lived a happy life, but in 2001 their marriage started to fall apart due to Kieran having an affair. The couple were in the midst of getting a divorce later in the year. Along with the potential divorce, the Murphys were also facing a potentially costly lawsuit stemming from a 1999 fire at one of their apartment complexes, which severely burned a 2-year-old girl. At the time, Kieran was living in an apartment in Nob Hill and Ornith had moved in with her niece in Oakland. Her boat was docked at the Oakland Marina in the Jack London Square area of the city. On December 15, 2001, both Kieran and Ornith would vanish along with Ornith's sailboat. Kieran was last seen at a Christmas office party on December 14. Kieran has never been heard from again. His friends and family became concerned when he failed to report for work on December 17, and they filed a missing persons report. It was at this point that they realized that Ornith was also missing. Ornith was last seen in Oakland on December 16, the day after Kieran had gone missing. The sailboat disappeared on the same day as Ornith and has never been located. It was found that Kieran and Ornith had planned to meet on December 15th to discuss legal issues. Ornith was seen working on her boat that afternoon. A witness reported seeing a man on board who was similar in appearance to Kieran. However, it was never established if he really was Kieran. Witnesses also reported hearing a loud noise coming from the boat in the evening. The witness described it as a banging noise. However, they weren't sure if the sounds were of gunshots. The boat was captured on video surveillance pulling out of the Oakland Marina at 8:36 p.m. that night. The boat was not equipped for long-distance sailing. It had about 1 week's worth of food on it when it disappeared, but no safety or foul weather gear. The next morning, Ornith called her niece from the boat and said she was in the marina in Berkeley. Her niece invited her to breakfast, but Ornith declined the invitation. No one ever heard from Kieran or Ornith again. Kieran's friends say that Kieran was planning on a trip to Mexico after Christmas. The couple's sons say it would be uncharacteristic of them to leave without warning. One theory surrounding the disappearance of Kieran and Ornith Murphy suggests that Ornith shot Kieran and then took her own life shortly afterward. However, there is no concrete evidence to support this theory. Despite the speculation, neither of the couple's credit cards nor their bank accounts have been accessed since their disappearances. Now, 18 years later, the Murphys remain missing, with no definitive answers about what happened to them during that time. Moving on to the next case. Maritza Glean Grimmett. In April 1983, children discovered the skeletal remains of an unidentified individual in a culvert in what is now Lake Forest, California. Responding to the scene near Old Trabuco and Canada Roads, an excavation was conducted to recover more remains. Upon examination, it was determined that the remains belonged to a female who was likely black or of mixed race. She was estimated to be between 5 feet 3 inches and 5 feet 6 inches tall, and between the ages of 18 and 24 years. Jane Doe was also noted to have a distinctive gold tooth. It was determined that the woman had been the victim of a homicide. In August 2010, the details of the case were entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System. Over the years, multiple forensic renderings of the woman were released in hopes of generating new leads. Despite extensive efforts by law enforcement to identify her, no matches were found, and the case eventually went cold due to a lack of viable leads. In 2022, the Orange County Sheriff's Department submitted forensic evidence to Othram, hoping that advanced DNA testing could help to finally identify the woman. Othram scientists successfully developed a DNA extract from the forensic evidence and used forensic-grade genome sequencing to build a comprehensive DNA profile for the unknown woman. After successfully completing the process, the DNA profile was delivered to the FBI's Forensic Genetic Genealogy team, and the FBI team performed the necessary work to generate new investigative leads in the case. Using these new leads, investigators contacted a distant genetic relative of the victim, who suggested Jane Doe's forensic renderings be posted to a Facebook group for Jane Does and missing women from the 1970s-1980s. Approximately 1 month after the posting, a woman contacted investigators and said she believed the Lake Forest Jane Doe could be her missing mother. Lake Forest Jane Doe is now known to be Maritza Glean Grimmett, a Panamanian native, married a U.S. Marine in the summer of 1978, and gave birth to a daughter. In late 1978, the family moved to the U.S. The family resided in Columbus, Ohio and Millington, Tennessee in late 1978 through mid-1979. In July 1979, the couple was going through a divorce. Maritza told her sister she was going to California. Her family never heard from her again since. She was 20 years old at the time of her disappearance. Investigators are actively investigating Maritza's slaying. Anyone with information on this case is asked to contact investigator Bob Taft at 714-647-7045 or coldcase@oaksheriff.gov. Anonymous tips may be submitted to OC Crime Stoppers at 855-847-6227 or at occrimestoppers.org. Moving on to the next case. Lynn Scholes. Lynn Scholes, a 17-year-old freshman at Middlebury College in Middlebury, Vermont, was looking forward to her final exams in December 1971. She had studied diligently for her English drama exam, scheduled for 1 p.m. on December 10th. At 12:55 p.m., Lynn left her dormitory with her friends to head to the exam. However, on the way there, she realized she had forgotten her lucky pen and told her friends she was going back to retrieve it from her room. That would be the last time Lynn was seen by her friends. She never returned to take her exam, and when they went to her dorm room, she was nowhere to be found. Although her friends initially thought it was strange, they waited for 2 days before reporting her as missing. A week later, her parents were informed of her disappearance. Lynn's personal belongings, including her checkbook, identification, and wallet, were left behind in her dorm room. During the police investigation, they found that on the day Lynn went missing, she was seen outside of a health food store called All the Good Things, eating prunes, just prior to meeting up with her friends to take the exam at around 12:30 p.m. During that time, she had reportedly mentioned to someone that she was going to be going to New York but that the bus had already left. Lynn then returned to campus where she had that walk with her friends and reportedly claimed she left her pen back in her dorm room. Later that day, witnesses reported to have seen Lynn again standing at the same bus stop where she was seen earlier around 2:15 p.m. This 2:15 p.m. confirmed sighting of her would be the last. Police at the time considered the possibility that Lynn had left of her own accord. Lynn had previously sent letters to her family stating she was homesick and was thinking of withdrawing from school. However, her friends and family said she was looking forward to going back to her home in Addison County, Vermont for the Christmas holidays, and they do not believe she would have run away. There were several sightings of Lynn in the days following her disappearance, but none of them were confirmed. The case would soon grow cold. Then in 2015, a tip led investigators to link Robert Durst as a possible suspect in Lynn's disappearance. Robert Durst was the owner of the All Good Things health food store, the same store that Lynn was last seen eating prunes in front of. Moreover, the store was across the street from the bus stop where Lynn was also seen. Robert Durst is the prime suspect in his wife Kathleen Durst's disappearance, and is also a suspect in the unsolved murder of Susan Berman. He was charged and acquitted for the murder of Morris Black in 2003. He is also considered a possible suspect in several other murders and disappearances, and his complete, troubling story is explored in HBO's documentary, The Jinx. Before the tip, investigators were unaware that Robert Durst had once owned the health food store, All Good Things. However, there is no solid evidence connecting him to Lynn's disappearance, and no new information has been released to the public. The case remains unsolved, and anyone with information about Lynn's whereabouts or what happened to her is urged to contact Detective Chris Bodish at 802-388-3191. Moving on to the next case. Stephanie Nurse. Stephanie Nurse was born on April 28, 1997, at Groote Hospital in Cape Town, South Africa. Celeste, her mother, recalled seeing a nurse comforting Stephanie next to her bed before she fell asleep. However, when Celeste woke up, a nurse was urgently asking where Stephanie was. It was then that Celeste realized her daughter had been taken. At first, she thought it might have been a cruel joke, but as time went on, it became clear that their daughter had been abducted. Each year on April 28, a family would celebrate Stephanie's birthday. They also did a lot of interviews to keep the search for her in the media. In July 2009, the family received a call where a woman whispered, "I know about your daughter." The woman then asked the 500,000 South African rand, which is about $70,000 US. When they went to the spot where the drop-off was supposed to take place, no one arrived to collect the money. The call was later traced to Glenda DeBell, who was a neighbor of Celeste Nurse. Linda was charged with extortion. The nurses also had a second daughter, named Cassidy Nurse. She started at a new school in 2015. There she met a girl 4 years older than her, that looked very similar to her. Cassidy shared the news with her father, Mornay Nurse, who then arranged to meet a woman named Mikey Solomon. When Mornay saw Mikey, he immediately noticed a striking resemblance, and he began to believe that she might be his daughter, Zephanie. DNA tests were conducted, confirming that Mikey Solomon was indeed Zephanie Nurse. In August 2016, Livona Solomon, the woman who had taken Zephanie and raised her as her own, was sentenced to 10 years in prison. It is believed that Livona had concealed the miscarriage and the remainder of her pregnancy before abducting Zephanie and pretending to have given birth to her. Moving on to the next case. Daniel Entwistle. On May 3, 2003, 7-year-old Daniel Entwistle from Great Yarmouth, England, returned home after running an errand for his mother. After entering the house, Daniel asked his father, David Entwistle, for money to buy some sweets. He left again and was captured on the store's CCTV. Daniel was seen once more on the store's surveillance camera, cycling by. This was the last confirmed sighting of Daniel. His red and white bike was discovered along a harbor wall near the river yard, about half a mile from his home, at around 3 a.m. on Sunday, May 4th. Authorities initially speculated that he might have fallen into the river and drowned, but his body was never found, possibly swept out to the North Sea. However, Daniel was afraid of water and unable to swim, making it seem unlikely that he would have climbed the harbor wall, putting himself at risk of falling into the river. In 2003, Joseph Sigger came forward a few days after Daniel disappeared and said he had seen Daniel playing with some kids near a raised wall by the river yard, where Daniel's bike was found, around lunchtime on May 3rd and again around 4 p.m. that same day. Sagger said Daniel and other children often played there. What's interesting about Sagger's claim is that it conflicts with Daniel's mother, Paula's, statement on where she and the family went that day. Paula claimed the whole family went shopping earlier in the day, returned home, and then Paula went to rest as she felt unwell, yet Sagger claimed to have seen Daniel playing around lunchtime. Despite a large police search of the area, Daniel was never found. Heartbreakingly, due to few funds and no PR campaign, his disappearance stopped being reported by the media after only a few days, and the case was closed by police just 3 months after he had vanished. The boy's father, David Entwistle, died in 2015. It is worth noting that David was convicted of having sex with a 12-year-old girl back in 1985. Police were aware of the conviction when Daniel vanished, but it was never made public. David was interviewed by detectives before his death in the search for his son but never made a suspect. Daniel remains missing to this day. Moving on to the next case. Keenan Day Bennett. In criminal cases, proving that a crime has taken place can be challenging when there is no body. Without this key evidence, the defense can argue that there is sufficient room for doubt, suggesting that the victim may have disappeared voluntarily. Historically, securing a conviction in murder cases without a body has been difficult. However, with advancements in forensic technology, we are now witnessing more and more cases where justice is achieved despite the absence of a body. On September 29, 2002, Bartasha McCullough informed Kmart staff that her 4-year-old daughter, Kenanda Bennett, was missing. According to McCullough, they had visited the Kmart in Whiteville, North Carolina around 5 p.m. when the girl disappeared. Initially, McCullough claimed that Kenanda vanished from an aisle in the store. However, she later revised her statement, saying she had entered the Kmart thinking her daughter was behind her, only to turn around and find her missing. McCullough and her daughter were from Conway, South Carolina, and had been visiting Kenanda's uncle in Whiteville at the time. Although the Kmart staff called emergency services, they noted that McCullough had initially opposed the idea. Local law enforcement quickly began searching the store and its surrounding areas but grew suspicious when no witnesses were found who had seen McCullough with Kenanda. Despite the presence of CCTV cameras in the store, there was no footage showing the 4-year-old. Investigators also found no evidence that Kenanda had even entered the state. Aside from her parents, McCullough and Eddie Bennett Jr., who went by Kevin, no one had seen her in the 2 days leading up to her disappearance. Authorities searched the couple's car, but there was no child seat in it, and no other signs that a young child had been present except a single Matchbox toy car, which they found wedged under a seat. As law enforcement officers became more doubtful about the McCullough story, they were approached by further witnesses from the couple's hometown who claimed that they had seen Kenanda with bruises on her shoulder and face just days before she vanished. When asked about them, the 4-year-old said, "My mommy did it." While one witness did confront Kenanda's mother, McCullough told them, "I'm going to whip her ass for telling you." Further fueling this idea, a second witness reported seeing cuts on the child's body and marks that looked as if they'd been caused by a strap. And Kenanda's grandparents had become so concerned for her welfare that on September 29, the very day she went missing, they told the police in Conway that they suspected the 4-year-old was being abused. They had not seen Kenanda in a week, and before contacting police, they went to confront their daughter with their suspicions. But while they heard someone moving around inside her apartment, nobody answered the door. Investigators noted that both of Kenanda's parents seemed uninterested in her case and never asked for any updates beyond the first week of the investigation. Additionally, McCullough failed a polygraph test regarding her daughter's disappearance, while Kenanda's father, Kevin Bennett, refused to take one, although both had samples of their blood and saliva taken. According to the authorities, both were uncooperative and both had inconsistencies in their stories. When McCullough was told that she had failed her polygraph, she reportedly cried. An officer said to her, "We both know that whatever happened to that child did not happen in North Carolina. It happened in that apartment, didn't it?" Here, Cananda's mother reportedly nodded. However, when she was asked to take them to where the body was, she told them she couldn't. After regaining her composure, McCullough retracted her previous admission and maintained that she had lost her daughter while at the Kmart store. When the police searched the family's home in Conway, things got worse. Investigators noted that the home had been sanitized with bleach, the smell still lingering in the air. 3 bottles of the substance, a damp mop, and several towels lay in plain sight. McCullough claimed that she was cleaning the apartment in preparation for an upcoming inspection by housing authorities, but officers believed she was attempting to clean up a crime scene. Searches of the home turned up transfer stains, which are stains left behind when fluid splatters are wiped, which matched Cananda's DNA. Authorities said that the scene would suggest that a physical assault had taken place. Furthermore, Cananda's toys and clothing had been thrown out as if her parents didn't believe she'd be coming home. And both McCullough and Bennett used past tense when talking about their missing daughter. In February of 2003, Anand's parents were arrested and charged with homicide by child abuse in connection with their daughter's case. Investigators claimed that the DNA evidence found in the apartment proved that the 4-year-old had died in Conway and had never even set foot in South Carolina. This, combined with the numerous witness statements about Cananda's abuse, led to the couple being charged. Around the same time, however, the parents accused the police of racism as they felt they did not conduct enough searches for their daughter. 2 years later, in October of 2005, Bennett's charges were dropped due to insufficient evidence. McCullough, however, was charged with more crimes, including unlawful neglects of a child and inflicting grievous bodily harm on a child. Throughout her trial, McCullough maintained her innocence. The prosecution theorized that Cananda's death was unintentional and that her mother had panicked and attempted to conceal the crime. However, the mother of one's defense said that McCullough had always maintained that she was not guilty and that the state has no evidence to the contrary. Despite this, the jury deliberated for just 4 hours before returning a guilty verdict. McCullough was convicted of all charges and sentenced to 20 years in prison. Reportedly, she burst into tears and clutched a Bible upon hearing this verdict, and her family appeared to be visibly upset by the news. McCullough's father, the one who'd reported his granddaughter's abuse to the police, believes his daughter is innocent. In the years since, McCullough has never told investigators what happened or where Kainan's body is. Cananda was described as a bright and well-mannered young girl who could read simple words and count to 30. She was a fan of SpongeBob SquarePants. Investigators suspect that her father was involved in her disappearance, and they have stated that they will pursue charges if new evidence emerges. Natasha McCullough is scheduled for release from prison in 2023. Cananda's case marked the first time in South Carolina history that a trial for a child's murder was held without the discovery of a body. Moving on to the next case. Lillian Marie Cardenas. In February 1967, unidentified remains were found at the bottom of a cliff north of Jenner, Sonoma County, California. The remains belonged to a woman who was between 52 and 54 inches tall. She wore a long-sleeved white blouse that buttoned down the back, along with light-colored pants. It was determined that she had likely died the previous year. Her manner of demise was ruled a slaying. She had multiple skull and rib fractures. Despite investigators' attempts, the woman could not be identified. She became known as Sonoma County Jane Doe. A forensic composite was developed. The case was made public in hopes of generating new leads about the woman's identity, but no matches were found. She was buried at the Sonoma County Cemetery. The details of the case were later added to the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System. In 2009, her body was exhumed with the help of Dr. Mark Griffin, an anthropology professor from San Francisco State University. The examination determined that Jane Doe was a white female between 40 and 46 years old. In 2022, the California Department of Justice, in collaboration with the Sonoma County Sheriff's Office, submitted forensic evidence to Othram, hoping that advanced DNA testing could assist with the identification of the woman. Othram scientists successfully developed a DNA extract from the forensic evidence. They used forensic-grade genome sequencing to build a comprehensive DNA profile for the unknown woman. Othram's in-house genealogy team used the DNA profile in a forensic genetic genealogy search to produce new investigative leads, which were returned to investigators. A follow-up investigation was conducted by law enforcement with the new leads. This led to relatives of the unidentified woman. Nearly 60 years after the remains were discovered in Sonoma County, the remains have been identified as Lillian Marie Cardenas, who was born in 1928. Lillian's last known residence was in San Francisco. She had been estranged from her family prior to her demise. The investigation into her demise is ongoing. Investigators ask for anyone with information on Lillian Marie Cardenas to dial 707-565-2727 or email officials at sheriff-coldcase@sonoma-county.org. Moving on to the next case. Xavier Rollins. On June 17, 2014, a young man tragically lost his life outside the River Crossing apartment complex in Texarkana, Texas. Xavier Rollins, a 25-year-old Army veteran, was the beloved son of Charlotte Rollins. Charlotte, despite facing numerous challenges, never gave up in her relentless pursuit of justice for her son. Years later, a breakthrough in the case would finally provide answers to what had once seemed like an unsolvable mystery. Xavier, who shared a close and loving bond with his mother, spent much of his time with her, and their relationship was built on love and mutual support. Everything changed on June 17, 2014, when Xavier was fatally shot outside the River Crossing apartment complex on College Drive. At just 25 years old, he had been out of the Army for 4 years and was working hard to build a future for himself. Although an investigation into his death was launched, no significant leads came forward, and the case remained unsolved, leaving Charlotte to cope with her profound loss. Despite the case going cold, her resolve to seek justice never faltered. On the 8th anniversary of Xavier's death, June 17, 2022, Charlotte organized a balloon release in an effort to renew attention on the case and encourage anyone with information to come forward. This poignant event was not just a tribute to Xavier, but also a call to the community to remember the impact of violence and to support families like hers who are left searching for answers. She expressed the following, encapsulating the longing for closure that she and countless other families endured. If someone came forward, I would know my prayers have been answered. Charlotte brought a banner adorned with photographs of local crime victims, highlighting the ongoing struggle for justice faced by many. She stated, "We have some of them that, yes, the case has been solved, but we have a whole lot of them that have not been solved." In 2024, a significant breakthrough occurred in the long unsolved case of Xavier Rollins, renewing hope for his family and friends. The police never ceased their efforts to find justice for Xavier, and Detective Thomas Shaddix had been diligently working on the cold case for several months. His commitment to uncovering the truth led him to discover DNA evidence, testing options that had not been available a decade earlier. Recognizing the potential of this technology, he decided to pursue it, in hopes of finally finding answers for the Rollins family. As Detective Shaddix delved deeper into the investigation, he sought the expertise of the Texas Attorney General's Cold Case and Missing Persons Unit, which provided invaluable assistance. Their collaboration was made possible through a federal grant program from the Department of Justice, allowing them access to numerous resources, including expedited forensic testing. These advanced forensic methods enabled law enforcement to identify 27-year-old Cameron Cheatham as a suspect in the 2014 slaying of Xavier. Following the identification of Cheatham, the Attorney General's office played a critical role in facilitating his arrest. Using the newly uncovered evidence, Detective Shaddix secured a warrant for Cheatham, charging him with capital slaying. Cheatham was not difficult to locate, as he was already in custody at the bi-state jail, serving time for a felony probation violation warrant stemming from his arrest in September. This fortunate turn of events allowed the police to expedite the legal process and ensure that justice was being sought for Xavier. On October 1st, 2024, Charlotte received the life-changing call she had been longing for. She will never forget the moment when Detective Shaddix informed her of the arrest. Charlotte recalled, her voice filled with emotion. And he said, "We made an arrest. And I just went to screaming and hollering and yelling. I mean, you would have thought that I had just had a baby for the first time. That is what that felt like. It is like, okay, I'm about to get justice for my baby." She shared, "I have got 30 to 40 shirts with his picture on them. Everywhere I went, he was going to see his face." After the arrest, Cheatham was booked on a capital murder charge, with his bond set at a substantial $1 million. The upcoming trial brought a renewed sense of purpose and closure, reigniting the hope that had gradually diminished over the years. Moving on to the next case. Rajan Ray Jenkins. On a quiet afternoon in Wilmington, Delaware, a young father was tragically shot, and the events of November 25, 2019, left the community searching for justice. Rajan Ray Jenkins became the victim of a senseless act of violence. The investigators faced numerous challenges, and the case eventually went cold. However, long-awaited developments later emerged, offering a glimmer of hope to a family devastated by loss. Rajan Jenkins, affectionately known as Ray, was born on June 13, 2000, in Newark, Delaware, to his mother, Tamika Jenkins. From a young age, Rajan displayed an active and curious nature, enjoying activities such as running, bike riding, and showing a strong interest in science. He attended Concord High School, where his energy and curiosity were nurtured, helping to shape his vibrant personality and deep sense of community. In 2016, Rajan met Amoni Hall, who would later become the mother of his only son, Aki Jenkins. Their bond grew as they navigated the responsibilities of parenthood together, and Rajan was a devoted father to Aki. Rajan was involved in his community from an early age. He sang in the Police Athletic League's youth choir and served as a youth counselor at the Kids for Christ summer camp, where his enthusiasm and caring spirit made a positive impact on many young people. On November 25, 2019, officers were dispatched to the 2300 block of Washington Street following a 911 call made just before 4 p.m. Upon arriving at the scene, they found Rajan Jenkins and another 20-year-old man suffering from injuries. Both men were quickly transported to a nearby hospital for treatment. Tragically, Rajan succumbed to his injuries and was pronounced deceased at the hospital, while the 20-year-old, whose identity was not released by authorities, was listed in stable condition. Despite the immediate response from law enforcement, there was little information available at the time regarding the events leading up to the shooting. The absence of key details left investigators struggling to piece together what had happened. As the hours turned into days, the case seemed to grow colder. And without any solid leads or witnesses coming forward, progress was slow. As time passed, the case gradually faded from public attention, joining the unfortunate ranks of cold cases that haunted the community. The investigation remained open, but the trail had gone cold, leaving lingering questions about who was responsible for the tragic loss of Rajan. In 2024, years after the case had gone cold, the investigation into Rajan's slaying was reassigned to the Wilmington Police Department's Cold Case Unit. With renewed focus and determination, detectives began to re-examine evidence, re-interview witnesses, and follow up on any new leads. Eventually, their efforts paid off when they identified two suspects, 21-year-old Akeem Henry and 19-year-old Ramir Black. On September 23, 2024, a New Castle County grand jury indicted both men in connection with Rajan's slaying. Following the indictment, Henry and Black were swiftly arrested in the days that followed. Authorities remained tight-lipped about what specific evidence had led them to identify Henry and Black as suspects in the long unsolved case. However, their arrest marked a significant breakthrough, bringing new hope to Rajan's family, who had been waiting for justice for nearly 5 years. Both Henry and Black were charged with multiple serious offenses, including first-degree slaying, first-degree attempted slaying, and 3 counts of possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony. In addition, they faced charges of first-degree reckless endangering, conspiracy, second-degree conspiracy, and illegal gang participation. Akeem Henry, in particular, faced an additional charge of possession of a firearm by a person prohibited, which further complicated his legal situation. Following their arrests, both Henry and Black were committed to the Howard R. Young Correctional Institution. Their bail was set at over $1,750,000 each, underscoring the seriousness of the charges they were facing. The case, once cold and stagnant, began to progress with renewed hope that the legal proceedings would bring some resolution to a family that had endured years of grief and uncertainty. This resolution not only addresses the tragic loss but also highlights the crucial role of dedicated law enforcement and community support in overcoming the challenges of cold cases and seeking justice. Moving on to the next case. Edith and Warner. Edith and Warner, a 35-year-old woman, lived with her two sons, Nicholas Smith and Andrew Warner, and her second husband, Henry Warner. Edith had been married twice. Nicholas was from her first marriage, and Andrew was from her second marriage to Henry. Edith, an art student, resided in on-campus housing at New Mexico State University with her family. In 1991, Edith and Henry were experiencing marital issues, and she had reportedly asked for a divorce in February of that year. On February 21, 1991, Nicholas went to school, and Edith attended her usual classes. Later that day, Edith informed her teacher that she would return in a few hours and left the class. This marked the last time she was ever seen. The following day, Nicholas did not go to school, and Edith was nowhere to be found. 7 days later, on March 2nd, Henry reported both Edith and Nicholas as missing to the police. Henry stated that on February 23rd, Edith had told him she was taking Nicholas with her to stay with a friend. Henry also stated that Edith had taken $1,000 from their joint account as well as $10,000 in gold and silver. At the time, the police believed Edith left of her own accord, taking Nicholas with her. However, her parents and her first husband, Nicholas's father, did not believe this, as she was a devoted mother and would not have left Andrew behind, who was only 3 years old. They also stated that Nicholas was close to his father and would have tried to make contact with him. Her parents said that they last talked to their daughter in February, and when they called her for 2 days in a row in early March, Henry would tell them that Edith was either not home or had gone out for a walk. On March 6th, when her parents called her again, Henry told them that Edith and Nicholas had actually been missing since February 23rd. The next day, Edith's father and her first husband went to visit Henry and tried to talk to him, but he refused, stating that he had to study for his final exams. They visited the campus student housing of the New Mexico State University and met a woman who told them that she had seen Edith a week before her disappearance, leaving her house with a number of cardboard boxes in her station wagon. In hopes of finding any clues, they visited several rental storage facilities, but to no avail. Henry has refused to talk to Edith's parents and moved to Los Alamos. He divorced Edith in July of 1991 in absentia. In 2008, police considered the possibility that foul play may be involved in Edith and Nicholas's disappearance, but the case remains open and unsolved. Moving on to the next case. Elias Jr. Munro. 2-week-old Elias Jr. Munro was last seen on February 2, 1987, when his mother, Maria, took him to the LAUSC Medical Center for a routine checkup at the 2000 block of Marengo Street. While waiting in the reception area with Elias, Maria was approached by a young woman who struck up a conversation. The woman appeared friendly and warm, and Maria thought nothing was unusual. She assumed the woman was simply another mother, or a mother-to-be, also waiting to be seen. As they continued talking, Elias began to cry. The friendly woman offered to hold the baby while Maria went to find some baby formula. But when Maria returned, both Elias and the woman were gone. The woman who had been caring for Elias had vanished without a trace. As investigators began looking into the abduction, they discovered an eerily similar incident had occurred 2.5 weeks earlier, on January 14, 1987, about 70 miles away in Hesperia, California. In that case, a Hispanic woman whose description matched Elias's abductor had approached a woman with a young baby, asking if she could hold the child. The mother turned her down, but the woman approached her again as she entered the car park. As she posed the question, a man appeared and attempted to pull the baby from the mother's grasp. Luckily, the mother and her child escaped unharmed by running into a nearby store. Although authorities can't be certain that this woman and the woman who took Elias are the same person, they believe it to be highly likely. The woman is described as Hispanic and between her late 20s and early 30s with a medium dark complexion and black hair frosted a lighter color. She wore a yellow blouse and appeared to be neat and well-groomed. She is between 5 foot and 5'2" and weighed between 135 to a pound 140. Investigators believe that Elias was taken by a woman who was desperate to have a child but unable to do so herself. It is possible he has been raised in another family with no idea as to his true identity. Elias was just 2 weeks old when he vanished from the LAUSC Medical Center in the 2000 block of Marengo Street in the company of a woman who was not his mother on February 2, 1987. Elias is a Hispanic male with brown hair and brown eyes. When he vanished, he was just 1'9", weighed a pound 8", and was dressed almost entirely in white. A white long-sleeved shirts, a white knit sweater, white knit pants, white socks, and a belt. He had been wrapped in a cream-colored blanket. If Elias is still alive, he will be 36 years old. This year, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children created an age-progressed image of Elias at this age. It is the first and only image we have of him, as no photos were taken at birth. Forensic artists used images of his siblings and other family members to determine what he may look like today. If you have any information about Elias's disappearance, you can contact the LAPD at 877-275-2273. Moving on to the next case. Josephine Backshall. Josephine Backshall, a religious and naive housewife in need of a job, posted an advertisement in the local newspaper with the phrase, "Anything considered." A wife and mother of 3, the 39-year-old believed she was being recruited to model cosmetics when a man named Peter called her. This man would later speak with Josephine over the phone and come to photograph her on the front lawn of her home. Josephine reassured her husband that Peter was of a good sort and someone she trusted, though she had no concrete reason to feel that way. Josephine had made an appointment with this man to meet and discuss her potential job as a cosmetics model. They went to a pub called the Fountain Public House in Good Easter at the late hour of 10:30 p.m. 3 days later, on November 1st, she would be found with her hands tied and her neck strangled. Surprisingly, there was no sign of sexual assault, although some acts can leave no trace. She was found fully clothed in a pond on Berry Green Lane in North Bishop Stortford. The only person to recall the two was the owner of the public house, who recalled the unusualness of this shifty male companion of Josephine's, who was so tall that his head brushed against the hanging beer growlers. Upon autopsy, it would be revealed that her last meal was Chinese food, though from where it was unknown. Her watch stopped at 8:15 p.m., although on what date it is unknown. Though an arrest was made in 2014, the man was subsequently released on bail and has never been re-questioned. Police have reached out for the public's help, but so far have received no credible leads. Moving on to the next case. Jared Negretti. Jared Negretti's disappearance occurred on July 19, 1991, when the 12-year-old boy from El Monte, California, went on an overnight camping trip to Camp Tackwitz in the San Bernardino National Forest. The trip included a hike up Mount Gorgonio, which stands at 11,503 feet. As the troop neared the summit, Jared became tired. Another group of hikers noticed him lagging behind and alerted the scout troop leader at the summit. However, the leader, an experienced hiker, reassured them that Jared would be picked up on the way back. When the troop returned, Jared was missing. An extensive search was launched by rescue teams, who discovered several matching shoe prints and some of Jared's belongings, including his backpack, beef jerky, and candy wrappers. Despite these clues, there was no further sign of Jared. While this could have been seen as a tragic case of a boy wandering off and succumbing to the elements, the situation took a chilling turn when one haunting image surfaced. Jared's camera was found in the woods and its film contained 12 recent photographs, which were eventually developed. Most of the photos were landscape scenes, apparently taken before Jared went missing, but the final picture on the roll of film was a ghastly photograph of the scout's eyes and nose, taken with the aid of the camera's flash, possibly at night. Family members said it appeared Jared pointed his camera at his face and snapped the picture. It seemed possible that the boy had lost the camera while sliding down a portion of the mountainside. Police said that Jared looked very scared in the image and that the mysterious picture was taken after he went missing. Despite the discovery of the camera and of its pictures, Jared remains missing 26 years on. Moving on to the next case. Joshua Maddox. On May 8, 2008, 18-year-old Joshua Maddox was last seen at his parents' home in Woodland Park, Colorado. He had told his sister he was going for a walk but never returned. His parents reported him missing the following day, and family members launched multiple searches, though no trace of him was found. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and months into years, but Joshua remained missing. 7 years later, on the day of his discovery, Joshua's skeletal remains were found less than a mile from his home, stuffed into the chimney of an abandoned cabin just 2 blocks away. The body was uncovered during the demolition of the cabin, which had been vacant for approximately 10 years. According to the cabin's owner, Chuck Murphy, his family had purchased the property in the 1950s, and it had been used as a rental until about 3 years before Joshua's disappearance. Chuck occasionally checked on the cabin but never inspected the chimney, noting that it had been inhabited by mice, chipmunks, and raccoons, with a strong, unpleasant odor. The coroner suspected the teen was trying to enter the cabin by shimming down the chimney and got stuck. When the teen's skeletons were found, his knees reportedly were above his head and a hand was covering his face. Although the coroner ruled his death accidental, many people do not believe this and think foul play was involved. One of the strangest things about Josh's death is the fact that he was inside the chimney wearing just a ripped thermal shirt. The rest of his clothes were found inside the cabin, so he must have had access to the cabin too. So the question arises, why would he need to enter the cabin by going down the chimney? Moreover, the construction workers who found the body said a large piece of furniture was blocking the fireplace, so Maddox would not have been able to access the chimney from there or to have exited from there. There was also a rebar installed on top of the chimney to stop animals from coming through, which would have made it nearly impossible for him to enter from the top. It doesn't make any sense that he would go through all the trouble just to enter the cabin even though he already had access to it, determined by the clothes found inside the cabin. Chuck Murphy is convinced that Joshua's death was not an accident. Things became more complicated when a post showed up on Reddit in 2015 where the commenter said that they were good friends with Josh and went to high school with him and another guy named Andy. After graduating, Josh had started hanging out with Andy a lot. Andy apparently told people he and Josh were planning a trip to New Mexico together. Shortly after this was when Josh went missing. Andy did make it to New Mexico where he supposedly stabbed a disabled man to death, and when arrested also admitted to killing a woman in Taos and stuffing her body in a barrel. When police traveled to Taos, they found the woman in the barrel, but since they already had a suspect in custody for the crime, they decided not to pursue charges against Andy. The key witness who had seen the disabled man being stabbed was later killed in a bar fight, leaving the police without any further evidence against Andy. As a result, the charges for that crime were eventually dropped. The poster also mentioned that several people in Woodland Park reported hearing rumors that Andy had boasted about burying Josh in a hole. Despite numerous calls for police to question Andy about Joshua's death, he was never investigated, and the circumstances surrounding Joshua's death remain unsolved. Moving on to the next case. Hu Pham and Hu Tran. In the 1970s, Hu Pham and his wife, Hu Tran, built a new life in America after fleeing war-torn Vietnam. The couple had been together for 49 years, raised 5 children, and had been retired since 2004. For Mother's Day in 2005, their children gifted them their first vacation ever. a 7-day Caribbean cruise on the Carnival ship Destiny, traveling from Barbados to Aruba. The couple also planned to visit their home country, Vietnam, after the cruise. However, they never returned from the trip. On May 9, 2005, Hu Pham and Hu Tran boarded the Destiny along with their daughter, Sharon, and granddaughter, not knowing it would be the last time they were seen. On May 12, as they sailed towards Aruba, the couple ate dinner in the ship's dining room and then decided to go for a show. Just before midnight, the telephone in their cabin rang. It was the front desk letting Sharon know that there was something there for her to retrieve. She went to the reception desk and was handed a plastic bag. The plastic bag contained 2 pairs of flip-flops, 2 passports, driver's licenses, medications, and a man's wallet containing credit cards and several $100 in cash. Sharon confirmed that the belongings were of her father and mother. The crew said that they found the things on the deck where her parents liked to sit. Sharon immediately searched for her parents, and when she wasn't able to find them, she informed the crew about their disappearance. Following their disappearance, the crew waited for over 4 hours before notifying the U.S. Coast Guard to help them locate the missing couple. Instead, the ship just continued on course and allowed the ship to further distance itself from the location where the couple was originally reported missing. There was no announcement made as it was late, and the crew did not want to disturb the other passengers. It took almost 12 hours before the search and rescue could arrive at the location of the disappearance. The search and rescue mission was called off in less than 13 hours from the presumed time of their disappearance. The couple's son, Michael, says the deck where his parents' flip-flops were found wasn't sealed off until several days later when the FBI met the ship in St. Martin. None of the passengers were ever questioned, and the ship continued on its. Their son Michael said that, quote, they were more focused on planning the next day's shore activities in St. Martin rather than protecting critical information and evidence pertaining to 2 of their missing passengers. The Carnival Corporation suggested that his parents may have committed suicide. The FBI also ruled it out as suicide. However, Michael denies this and said his parents had no reason to commit suicide. They lived a happy, fulfilling life and were excited about going back to Vietnam. Michael Pham, along with his family, had been looking forward to returning to Vietnam after their long and fulfilling life in America. The couple was excited about the trip, but their disappearance left a devastating void. Unfortunately, the cruise line failed to offer any meaningful assistance or answers regarding their parents' whereabouts. In an effort to seek justice, the Pham children testified before Congress, pushing for improved safety measures on cruise ships. Despite their efforts, they have yet to receive any concrete answers about what truly happened to their parents during the cruise. Moving on to the next case. Charles Hardin. A chilling mystery that has haunted Canyon Lake, Texas, for over 3 decades has finally unraveled. In 1986, the body of Charles Hardin was discovered at a remote campsite, bound and lifeless, a puzzle that eluded investigators for years. Despite an initial promising lead, the case went cold until a breakthrough reignited the investigation. 2 men, linked to the crime and living miles apart, now face charges for a violent crime that had seemed destined to remain unsolved. Who were they? What ultimately brought them to justice after all these years? In 1986, a mysterious and brutal slaying cast a shadow over Canyon Lake, a popular camping and recreation area. On August 26th of that year, the lifeless body of 56-year-old Charles Robert Hardin was discovered at Jacobs Creek Park, a scenic spot along the lake's east end. Charles, originally from Houston, had been staying at the park when his body was found by fellow campers. He was discovered bound with strips of bed sheets tied around his neck, hands, and feet, indicating that his death was no accident. An autopsy confirmed what investigators feared. His life had been cut short by asphyxiation, and his body had been decomposing for about 6 to 7 days when it was found. At the time of the discovery, Como County Sheriff's Office investigators, Rudy Rubio and Dennis Kep, launched a thorough investigation. The case seemed to have all the hallmarks of a violent, deliberate slaying. But despite a number of leads, the case went cold. A composite sketch of a suspect, described as a Latin male in his mid-30s, was circulated. and local authorities sought information on a blue 1980s Chevrolet Celebrity sedan that had been spotted near the campsite on the day before Charles's body was found. The public was also alerted to the case through Crime Stoppers, which offered a reward. But leads dried up and the investigation stalled. For years, the slaying of Charles Hardin seemed destined to remain unsolved. That was until 2021, when Texas Ranger Joshua Ray was brought in to review the cold case. Ray resubmitted old evidence to the Texas Department of Public Safety's crime laboratory in Austin, hoping that advancements in forensic technology could yield new clues. It was this renewed investigation that would ultimately break the case wide open. The DPS lab results pointed to two men, 56-year-old Tracy Keith Loy and 57-year-old Mark Gatton, as prime suspects. The two men, living in different parts of the country, had been in their 20s at the time of the crime. Loy was located in St. George, Utah, and Gatton was found in Quaker City, Ohio. Their connection to Charles and the motive for his slaying remains unclear, but their involvement in the case was undeniable. In May 2023, after interviews with both suspects, authorities made their arrests. Loy was extradited to Texas and booked into the Como County Jail, where he was held on an $80,000 bond. Gatton was arrested just before, awaiting extradition to Texas. The arrests of both men have revived questions about their relationship with Charles and whether their actions were driven by personal grievances, robbery, or something else entirely. For many in the Canyon Lake community, Charles's death had been a distant tragedy, but the recent developments have brought the chilling case back into the public eye. On October 13, 2023, Mark Gatton was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. On February 9, 2024, Tracy Keith Loy was sentenced to 60 years in prison after pleading guilty. Before I continue, I want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch my videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy my content, consider subscribing. It's free and you can always change your mind later. Now, let's move on with the video. Moving on to the next case. John Edward Robinson. This seemingly innocent family portrait featuring 5 smiling individuals and a baby takes on a chilling tone when you learn that the man in the yellow sweater is John Edward Robinson, one of America's most disturbing serial killers, and the baby on his lap is the child of one of his victims. Born on December 27, 1943, in Cicero, Illinois, Robinson came from a strict and abusive household. As a youth, he struggled academically, frequently getting into fights and eventually dropping out of both high school and university. In 1969, Robinson was arrested in Kansas City for embezzling $33,000 from a medical practice where he had worked as a radiographer using forged credentials. Although Robinson had attended university and studied to become a radiographer, he dropped out after 2 years. He was sentenced to 3 years of probation for his embezzlement crime but violated it almost immediately by moving to Chicago without permission. In 1971, he was arrested again for embezzling funds while working as an insurance salesman. He returned to Kansas City, where his probation was extended. Over the next decade, Robinson would persist in committing nonviolent crimes, mostly related to financial wrongdoing. Although Robinson is known to be responsible for the murders of 8 individuals, investigators suspect that there may be many more victims due to unaccounted for periods in his life. Several of his confirmed victims were either never reported missing or have never been found, suggesting the possibility of many more unknown victims. His first known victim was 19-year-old Paula Godfrey, whom Robinson hired at his management consulting firm in 1984. He told Paula that he was sending her and several other non-existent female employees on a trip to San Antonio, Texas, to attend a clerical skills course. On September 1st, Robinson picked her up from her home to take her to the airport, but Paula never returned. She lived with her parents at the time of her disappearance, and they reported her missing when she didn't return. Robinson claimed he knew nothing of her whereabouts, but days later, a typewritten letter appeared on the parents' doorstep supposedly signed by Paula. She reassured her parents that she was fine and she didn't want to see or speak with them. She has never been seen or heard from again, with law enforcement claiming at the time that because she was legally an adult, there was nothing they could do if she had left of her own volition, as the letter stated. Robinson's most notable crime, however, came a year later when he met 19-year-old Lisa Stacy. Lisa was the mother of a 4-month-old baby, Tiffany, and was living at a women's shelter in Kansas City. Robinson, using the alias John Osborne, invited Lisa to join the Kansas City Outreach Program, a program he'd supposedly started to help downtrodden women. He visited shelters and hospitals to try and entice women to join, and claimed that they would be given free room and board while studying, and that he would be able to help them get jobs after they received their qualifications. Lisa was taken with the idea, hoping to give her baby a better life, and Robinson subsequently put her and Tiffany up in a hotel. In exchange for his hospitality, however, Robinson asked her to sign 4 sheets of paper. Soon, Lisa called her family, crying hysterically and explaining that she'd signed paperwork. Her mother-in-law, Betty, told her not to sign anything, and she was just crying. And then she finally settled down, and she says, "Here they come now." And she hung up. And that was the last time I heard from her. Nobody saw or heard from Lisa again. Her family received a typewritten letter days later similar to the one Paula Godfrey's family received. It was supposedly signed by Lisa. The director of the women's shelter where Lisa stayed also got a letter which read in part, "I want to thank you for all your help. I've decided to get away from this area and try to make a good life for me and Tiffany." Lisa's mother noted that her daughter was not skilled enough at typewriting to have written such lengthy letters. Between 1987 and 1993, Robinson was imprisoned for multiple fraud convictions and parole violations. And between 1992 6 more women disappeared. However, he became increasingly careless. And by 1999, he had attracted the attention of investigators given how often he was linked to missing persons cases. He was arrested in June 2000 after a sexual battery complaint was filed against him, while another woman accused him of theft. Investigators began searching Robinson's property, which is where they found the bodies of 2 of his victims in 85-pound chemical drums. 3 further bodies were found on the property. In 2003, he was found guilty of 3 murders. And in 2005, he accepted responsibility for 5 more so that he could avoid the death penalty. He is currently 80 years old and still in prison. As for the baby seen in that eerie photograph, she is Tiffany Stacy. Days after Lisa's disappearance, Robinson approached his brother, Donald, and sister-in-law, who were looking to adopt a baby, but had so far been unsuccessful while using traditional channels. He claimed that he knew of a baby whose mother had recently taken her own life and asked for $5,000 in legal fees. Donald and his wife happily agreed to pay, and baby Tiffany was handed over and given the name Heather. In 2000, following Robinson's arrest, it was revealed that a woman believed to be Tiffany Stacy was actually Heather, who had been taken by Robinson as a teenager. At the time of her abduction, Heather was just 15 years old. Through DNA testing, it was confirmed that she was Tiffany Stacy, and she later chose to keep the name given to her by Donald and his wife, ultimately being officially adopted by the couple when she turned 18. Although Robinson was charged with Lisa's murder, her body has never been found, and the exact details of her disappearance remain unclear. Thanks for watching.